Good morning, and thank you for attending Leadership at the Top. My name is Hayden Creaky. I'm from Madison, Wisconsin, and thank you so much for having me in Minneapolis this morning. Now, we have an action-packed agenda for the next 2 days of this seminar, but I want to get you off by kind of whetting your appetite of what we're going to talk about. And then what we'll do is we'll take a break, we'll talk about the logistics of the next couple of days, and come back and start on our formal agenda. So, this is Leadership at the Top. And I want to start off by talking to you about 5 leadership competencies. We're going to talk about a lot of competencies in the next few days that leaders must have. And make no mistake about it, I believe that leading is incredibly hard. And most leaders aren't born, but every single one can be trained. As an executive, you've already shown a lot of the capabilities. There are 5 things I think you need to succeed in the 20th century and into the future. 1, you must be a developer of people. The old adage goes, hire really good people, indeed people brighter than yourself, and then get out of the way. You have to be a champion of innovation. Today's world is ever changing, and that change is accelerating. You, as a leader, must be a champion of the innovation and change that you're seeing in your organization. Now, this is incredibly important for the simple reason that the only constant you're likely to face for the remainder of your careers, however long that is change. You must be an exceptional communicator. Long gone are the days of Henry Ford, where a worker came to the line and was told what part to screw in, and you could have any color of a car you wanted as long as it was black. Today's information-centric, accelerated change economy requires a leader to communicate. Let's be honest, it's incredibly hard for a leader to succeed, or indeed the leader's team to succeed, unless they know what the target is that they're shooting for. So you must be a good communicator. Now you notice I put 360 in back brackets here. This is not only about you disseminating information, and we're going to talk about that before we even take our break and how important I believe this is. This is also about you getting feedback about your communication, where you hit and in the instance where you missed. Adaptability. Now, adaptability is incredibly important also. We've talked about an accelerated change environment I'm sure that you're experiencing regardless of the business that you come to us from here today. The ability to adapt and to do so with confidence as a leader ultimately is going to inspire the same confidence and ultimately acceptance and productive motions forward by your team members. And you need to have a global mindset and cultural agility. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the world is smaller than it ever was before. When we think about businesses today, we think about businesses as not only serving one market, one region, one state, but indeed as global enterprises. The internet has enabled, if you will, among other things, our world to shrink. Now here's that culture part that's incredibly important in my opinion, and actually in the opinion of all of us here at Skillpath. Cultural adaptability is about, in fact, getting the culture right within your organization, but integrating today's workforce. Hey, the statistics tell us in the next few years, the Hispanic population will be the majority population in the United States. That's going to require a different approach than perhaps has been traditionally used. So, developing people was the first thing on my list, and I want to expand on that a little bit before we take our break this morning. Developing people is simply put, every leader's responsibility. And here's the sad fact. Few deliver. You as a leader at the top, if you want to be successful, have to focus, probably an inordinate in your opinion, but I would tell you a critical amount of time in developing leadership capabilities among your people and developing their competencies too. So, nice thing to say, but how do you actually do this? Well, I'd make 4 points. I think all good leaders, all successful leaders act as role models. If you are someone that can be trusted, if you are someone who ultimately can be followed, if you serve as a role model for what you're looking for from your people, they're likely to emulate that model. I think you need to build sustainable processes too to support the development of your folks. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, do we? Every single time that we have a new employee. The onboarding process needs to be documented and regularized, for example. And so is the training curriculum for someone who will ultimately be successful at the work. And so as leaders, it's our job not only to champion, but in some instances to do the heavy lifting around building sustainable processes for developing people. Last but not least, I bring on this issue of leveraging problems as opportunities for real-world learning and development. Now, if you're like me, you've probably done this lots of times. Something's on fire at the office, and what you do is you take ownership of it and you resolve it. Great for your business. Probably not so good for your people. Here's why. Problems are the opportunities that you're going to have to impart both some of your leadership skills, but also some of the knowledge that you've gained in all of your years at an organization, or for some of your months, that you can pass on to your people to enable them ultimately to be successful. Well, I just want to point out, I didn't miscount. I really did only have 3 points. I did say 4, and I apologize for that. Okay, here's what I think is needed, and this quote is not mine. This is from Forbes magazine, and I read it actually on the flight over here. Here's what it says, and I want to just go ahead and read it straight to you. What is needed is a deep-rooted conviction among leaders that people really matter. That leaders must develop the capabilities of employees, nurture their careers, and manage the performance of individuals and teams. What are we trying to say? Or what was Forbes' article trying to say? They're saying that by not developing your people, you're inherently making a concession that deep down you don't necessarily believe those people are as important. Perhaps you think you're the most important person. But we're going to talk about that in the next 2 days. And the other thing is it tells you what the key qualities that a leader needs, at least in this context, right? Employees need to have their careers nurtured. If you want to attract and retain the best and the brightest, you must nurture these people's careers. You need to manage their performance. We're going to talk about communication in a few slides, but ultimately this is about being honest and objective as possible in giving feedback about both the good things that employees are doing and the areas that they can improve upon. Now, I'll tell you a statistic that I read several years ago, and I no longer remember, but it's an important one as I finish this slide. For every one piece of constructive criticism was the term of art in my early management days. For every one piece of constructive criticism you give to an employee, you need to give them 7 compliments just so they feel they're doing okay. Think about that for a second. 1 to 7 is a ratio. I'll ask a rhetorical question. Do you think you say thanks and good job to your employees? Okay, I want to move on and talk about communicating as I promised. And we're getting close to that break. You'll get a little coffee in just a short while. Communicating in a business environment is primarily to gain trust. Secondarily, it is about, as a leader, making certain your people have the information that they need to ultimately hit the goals that the organization has set forth. So, to win, simply put, you must communicate open and often. Now, a lot of us think we're great communicators, but I would tell you it almost has to be 3x the effort of the average leader in terms of communicating. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about formal and informal lines of communication. Now, to build trust, which is something that's earned, requires ultimately personal effort. And that's really what I'm talking about. This constant attempt to, 1, deal with the individuals that work with you, and indeed the other team members downstream. But beyond that, it is about dealing with each person on their terms. I also would advise you to share information quickly and freely. You know, I've worked in organizations for so many years and been privy to so many secrets that I would argue should have been disseminated in the first instance to every single employee. Now here's what happens, typically. The grapevine actually gets active, the information gets out, it's obviously skewed, it's not correct, and on the backside, it is then used, the misinformation, as a filter for when you deliver the information. Simple enough. You've got to be quick. And be free with information. I've alluded to this before, but this ultimately is about keeping only the things that are necessarily confidential, for example, like human resource performance issues, and disseminating the rest of the information. We can have a discussion as we go forward about non-disclosure agreements, and if you're a privately held company, some of the financial issues and disclosing your financials. But I think there are ways to disseminate information. And I think this is such a critical point because, as I've alluded to earlier, and as I've said before, if people do not know what target they need to hit, they have a very low probability of ultimately hitting it. Ensure that everyone understands the context of work and corporate priorities. Look, you're all leaders in this room, and you're all intelligent people. But here's the thing. Among intelligent people, and in today's information-centric workforce, intelligent people can often agree to disagree about the approach to resolving a problem and what ultimately is the best solution. The trick is, if you explain why the organization or you as a leader is taking a particular path, even if your people do not, even if they do not agree with you, if you take the time to explain why, they usually can get behind the idea. If you don't say why, if you use a command and control type leadership approach, it doesn't work so well. And measure progress and get feedback. Whether you use informal or formal lines of communication, you need to get a loop going, that 360 idea, where you demand, and not demand, but really actually request feedback from your people about the efficacy of a particular communique. Different cultures, different methods of communication are going to be acceptable, different problems, different methods of communication. And the trick for you, if you want to be successful as a leader at the top, is selecting the right communication that fits within the culture for the right issue that you're facing. All right, I want to talk about leadership styles before we take our break too. Now, we have lots more on leadership styles in the material, but I want to give you 3 leadership styles, and three leadership styles that I think you must develop at least good competency in, and one that I would discourage you from ever using again if it in fact is your style today. So, I'm going to ask you, because this is leadership at the top, to in fact be a visionary. They, and visionaries that is, articulate where the group is going. And coaches focus on developing individuals, and I think by now you get my point about the importance of this. And then I'm going to encourage you to be democratic. Long gone is the command and control structure. If you hire highly competent, highly